podcast where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-wide facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The Bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine podcast, where we cut through daily industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation.
And today, we're diving deep into a feature piece about the architects of resilience, the operations that survive when everyone else is hitting the exit button.
Yeah, we're talking about structural change here, specifically this massive consolidation waves and what, fundamentally separates the survivors from those who are forced to liquidate.
And I think we need to frame this with the stark reality first.
Absolutely. We are not talking about a slow recession. We are looking at 16,000 dairy farms disappearing between 2017 and 2022.
16,000.
That is a nearly 40% decline in farm numbers across the country, and the forecast is thousands more exits this decade. I mean, this isn't gentle. This is a foundational reshaping.
It's not just attrition, it's economic amputation. And the stakes for this deep dive are incredibly clear, especially for the operators sitting in that vulnerable middle, 300 to 700 cow range. Our deep analysis of the operations that made it through the last decade's volatility, the Morenos, the McCarty families, versus those who failed, like that historical Stookey saga, led to one inescapable conclusion.
Okay.
The survivors didn't predict markets better.
Wait a minute. I'm not sure I'm buying that entirely. Surely if you avoided expanding right before the 2014 crash, that was smart prediction, not just structure.
I'd say timing is luck. Strategy is structure. The lasting enterprises, they simply structured their operational and financial risk so they could survive being wrong about pricing or feed costs or policy.
So they built a hull that could handle the storm surge.
Exactly. If you build a business model that requires the milk price to cooperate or, interest rates to stay low, you're not building a strategy. You're playing speculation. You're betting the farm, literally.
And right now, we're seeing that speculation manifest in maybe the most dangerous trap facing the generational farm.
Debt succession collision.
Yeah, we have to unpack this huge issue.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the 55-year-old farmer who decides they need to modernize or scale up to survive that commodity gap we're always talking about.
Okay.
They take on, say, $3 million in new expansion debt, maybe a 15-year note.
Right.
By the time that principal debt is manageable and the business is truly stabilized, they're 70 years old.
70. And now they're facing succession. So they're handing the keys, if they can't even find a successor, to an operation that is carrying the maximum leverage of its entire lifespan.
And that successor, usually their kid, is suddenly forced to manage that peak risk right when the senior generation needs to start retiring the assets.
That debt trap just kills healthy succession. It forces the sale.
It does. And we also need to challenge that assumption that bigger is always better. We're going to examine the specific fragility of those 4,500 cow operations.
Right.
They achieve efficiency, sure, but they trade it for fragility in completely different and often less predictable areas.
Okay, let's unpack this with the cold, hard numbers that really define this crisis. We said 16,000 farm exits.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker. The national milk output isn't collapsing. The USDA projects modest growth in total output through 2030, with cow numbers holding roughly stable around 9.5 million head.
So the milk is still getting produced.
The milk is still getting produced.
Which means the math confirms consolidation is absolutely rampant. The census data analyzed by FarmDoc Daily illustrates this perfectly. Operations with 2,500 or more cows grew from 714 to 834 in that 5-year period alone.
Just 5 years.
And that small fraction of farms now accounts for a rising, dominant share of production.
And that reality is built on an unavoidable structural advantage. It's the core cost gap that is literally crippling the middle market. It's not a hypothetical margin, it's a chasm.
It is a chasm. Rabba Research published data showing that farms milking over 2,000 cows operate about $10 per hundredweight cheaper than those middle-of-the-road operations.
The ones with 100 to 199 cows.
Yeah, exactly. And that cost difference is sustained through Labor efficiency, bulk purchasing, capital utilization, all the things that come with scale.
$10 per hundredweight. I mean, let's stop treating that as just a statistic and start treating it as a strategic weapon.
It is.
If you were a 500 cow farm and your baseline cost of production is $22, while the 3,000 cow farm down the road is producing for $12, how can you possibly survive playing the exact same commodity game?
You can't. You are structurally disadvantaged from the jump. You are essentially competing with one hand tied behind your back and your feet in wet concrete. The middle market, trying to win on volume efficiency, is already losing.
But the conventional wisdom assumes that those 2,500 cow-plus dairies are invincible economic fortresses.
Right, that they've solved the equation.
And here's where our contrarian take comes in. Scale creates massive efficiency, yes, but it also creates fragility in different places. They've exchanged those margin gaps for risk concentration.
That's such a critical distinction. We talked to managers in Idaho and the Southwest, and they admitted their operational risk is different, often less predictable than, say, a smaller farm.
How so?
Think about their reliance on specialized, highly leveraged capital equipment. One major breakdown on a custom-designed rotary parlor can idle 20% of their milking capacity until an overseas part arrives.
Whereas a small farmer has 3 smaller parlors or tie stalls. They can flex and repair locally.
Exactly. And the regulatory exposure is exponential. A 300-cow dairy deals with local county zoning. A 4,500-cow operation, what we've called the supertanker, is now a high-profile target for environmental litigation and state-level regulatory review.
We need to detail this because it's where their $10 per hundredweight advantage really starts leaking.
Okay, let's look at California with CEQA and his SDMA.
CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act.
Right. Any significant expansion or new construction triggers these massive environmental impact reports. And these reports are expensive. They take years, and they attract litigation from activist groups like Magnets.
So you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and consulting costs before you pour a single yard of concrete.
Before you even break ground. And SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, that's even more insidious because it targets their core resource, water.
Right.
SGMA mandates that local water agencies must achieve groundwater sustainability. For a mega dairy, this often translates directly into costly, required monitoring wells, mandated reporting, and potentially restricted pumping volumes.
Or worse, high-priced water allocations based on historic use.
Yeah. The cost of compliance for one SGMA filing can dwarf the annual regulatory budget of 20 smaller farms combined. Scale means you have to hire dedicated environmental compliance staff or external legal counsel just to stay in business.
So their vulnerability isn't low milk price. It's labor policy shifts, environmental policy changes, and capital risk during credit contractions. They are efficient, but brittle.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to what we call the vulnerable middle. The farms in that 300 to 700 cow range.
They are caught in no man's land.
Completely. Too large to efficiently pivot to direct marketing. I mean, you can't process 50,000 pounds of milk a day through an on-farm store, but you're too small to win on pure commodity economics against the giants.
They have to change the entire nature of the game they are playing. They cannot try to beat the supertanker at volume.
And we see this pressure playing out geographically, right? The general trend is capital moving away from high regulation, high population density areas.
Right.
Wisconsin is still gaining cows, but it is purely driven by consolidation. The average farm size is just ballooning. Capital investment is flowing heavily into Idaho, Texas, and New Mexico.
States with lower feed costs, lower regulatory overhead, and fewer population centers to fight development.
And the corollary is that California is projected to suffer massive losses due to those exact regulatory hurdles we just discussed. The compliance costs added by CEQA and SGMA are forcing exits.
And in the Northeast, the pressure is different. It's urban sprawl and the distance from efficient, high-volume processing centers, making their transport costs proportionally higher.
And even where consolidation is mandated, like in Canada's quota framework, we see attempts to mitigate that volume focus.
That's interesting.
The BC Milk Marketing Board announcing phased grass-fed premiums, reaching 16 cents per liter by 2027. That shows a structural attempt to incentivize producers to differentiate themselves away from simple bulk milk.
So the key for the middle market is finding the premium gap.
It has to be. If the industry reality is a structural cost gap and high-volume commodity competition, then the solution cannot be to try and bridge that $10 gap by adding another 100 cows.
It has to be a structural strategy shift.
That's the pivot point. The difference maker is structuring risk to survive being wrong. And to illustrate what happens when that structure fails, we have to revisit the classic speculation failure case, Jack Stookey in the 1980s.
This is a story that should be mandatory reading for anyone considering a major capital investment today because it illustrates that the foundation of the business matters more than the quality of the cows.
Absolutely. Stookey was a brilliant cattleman. Late 70s, early 80s, he built an elite herd, the kind of genetics people dream about. 30 excellent cows, premier exhibitor honors. He had a 1,500-acre operation.
Sounds like he was on top of the world.
He was. But he built it on investor capital that was attracted primarily by Section 46 tax shelters.
Okay, let's slow down and explain Section 46. For the listeners who weren't farming in 1980, what was this policy that made non-farming investors so interested in dairy cattle?
It was essentially an accelerated depreciation allowed on high-value capital assets, and that included livestock. The tax code allowed high-net-worth investors to, front-load their paper losses.
So they weren't farmers.
No, not at all. They invested cash into Stookey's operation, often structured as them owning the cattle, and then they immediately claimed massive tax write-offs through depreciation losses that offset their income from other sources, like doctors or lawyers in the city.
So the investors weren't looking for a return on milk sales in 5 years. They were looking for a massive tax deduction this year.
Exactly. The business was structured around a tax incentive, not the fundamental economics of producing milk.
The business model required the subsidy to function. Without that tax break, the cost of that capital was far too high relative to the milk price.
And then came the shock.
Yeah.
1983, 1984. The IRS started challenging these schemes as abusive tax avoidance. They disallowed the Section 46 credits, demanding 6 figures in back taxes from operations that had relied on this structure.
So the economics vanished overnight.
Overnight, Stookey was forced into bankruptcy.
And what's the ultimate ironic punchline of this whole failure?
The genetics survived. The Stookey Elm Park Black Rose cow family was durable, highly productive, and went on to produce modern genetic stars.
So the cattle were sound.
The cattle were incredible. The business model was speculative, and it failed because it was built on a policy foundation that just disappeared. Remove the incentive, and the entire operation collapsed. That is speculation.
That makes the point so powerfully. It's not about being a good farmer. It's about being a good business architect. Now, let's contrast that with the disciplined success stories we saw in the Midwest, where operators actually grew healthily during the volatile 2010s.
They played the strategy game. We saw repeated examples highlighted by extension economists where successful operators stress-tested their projections not at the $20 market average, but at pessimistic survival prices.
They cited figures like $16 per hundredweight milk.
Exactly. They modeled their entire expansion based on surviving the absolute worst case.
So they weren't asking how much money can we make if prices stay high. They were asking, can we survive a $16 milk year for 2 years straight and still service the debt?
Precisely. And they also locked in key feed contracts before breaking ground, hedging a major input cost.
Smart.
And crucially, they expanded in phases. They built Barn A, stabilize the debt load, perfect the manure system, and then, and only then, did they consider Barn B.
Incremental growth.
It allowed them to absorb the volatility of the 2020 through 2022 period. They structured their risk to absorb the cost of being wrong about that 2022 feed inflation spike.
That's the difference between building a business that reacts to the market and one that is structured to endure the market.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give the listener the tool they need. This is the 5-question framework, the non-negotiable stress test for any major investment decision.
And this test separates calculated, strategic risk from pure speculation.
Let's start with the Stookey question. Question 1, what has to remain true for this investment to work?
Right. If the answer requires continued low interest rates, or a trade war to end in your favor, or external policy remaining stable, things you cannot actively and immediately control, you have to pause.
So if your $5 million expansion only works if the next administration passes a specific feed subsidy bill, you are speculating on politics, not building a business.
The Stookey family needed Section 46 to remain true. When it didn't, they failed. It's that simple.
That reframes the entire decision-making process. If success depends on an external variable you don't control, you don't have a plan, you just have a hope.
Moving to question 2. Can you test the thesis incrementally?
This is about phase deployment.
It is. We've seen countless examples of farms that bought all the equipment, built all the barns, and took all the debt in one go, only to realize the labor efficiency model they relied on was flawed.
And by then it's too late.
It's too late.
Yeah.
Phased deployment means you spend $1 million, you learn the flaws in your execution, you fix them, and then you spend the next $1 million. Learning along the way is the ultimate catastrophic risk mitigation tool.
That leads naturally to execution focus. Question 3, what do you actually control?
Yeah. Are you betting on yourself to execute a perfect ration and improve reproduction rates from 16% to 22%? That's internal execution.
Right.
Or are you betting that the price of corn won't spike by $3 a bushel? That's external noise.
Success dependent on internal execution like herd health improvements, perfecting custom feeding protocols, improving labor retention. That's the only sustainable path.
Betting that the global economy won't enter a recession or that your competitor will collapse before you do. That is not a plan. It's wishful thinking.
The ultimate stress test is question 4. Does the economics work without the incentive, the thing that's making it attractive right now?
This means running the numbers with zero subsidies. Remove the one-time grant, take out the cheap credit line you secured based on your 2022 peak income, and drop the current milk price to that survival $16 per hundredweight mark.
And if the fundamental transaction is now unprofitable,
Then you are building an operation on a temporary subsidized foundation.
and finally, the question that defines true resilience, question 5. What does failure look like, and can you survive it?
You have to define the downside scenario with brutal honesty. Is the worst-case scenario losing the capital you invested in that new facility, but your existing operation continues debt-free at its current size?
Or does failure mean default, liquidation, and bankruptcy?
That's the difference between strategic failure and existential failure.
And I think that Minnesota lender anecdote we mentioned is so key here. They observed that the operators who came in already having run these brutal stress tests, who could articulate the downside and show they could survive $16 milk, they are still farming 5 years later.
And the ones who just wanted validation for their expansion plan.
Largely aren't. It's a predictive framework for survival.
So how do these concepts actually manifest in real-world operations? We have 3 vastly different models that all embody structural resilience, starting with the infrastructure play of Juan Moreno and STgenetics.
Moreno built infrastructure, not just a commodity product. We're talking about 1,800 employees across 16 countries. His sex-sorted technology now accounts for an estimated 30% of global semen sales.
That's market dominance.
And it was achieved through years of painful investment.
And this is where the discipline is so instructive. When sex-sorted semen first came out, the conception rates were terrible.
Oh, I remember.
The technology required specialized, expensive equipment, and you lost vast amounts of good genetic material in the sorting process. From a purely rational, short-term economic viewpoint, it was a terrible investment for years.
It was a non-rational investment. It required what we call deep-pocketed patience. So why did he keep investing when the initial numbers looked so bad?
Because the long-term thesis was structurally sound. The thesis was that technology would eventually improve to make sexed semen economically and biologically viable for the mass market.
So he bet on technology and infrastructure development, which he controlled, not on market price spikes, which he couldn't.
Exactly. The payoff took years, hitting critical mass between the 2013 Sex-Ultra launch and the 2017 introduction of Sex-Ultra 4M, when conception rates finally approached conventional semen levels. It became the global standard because he built the underlying structure that allowed the product to work reliably.
And his restraint is equally telling. Note his stated philosophy against pushing genetic modification. He said, "We're playing with fire by doing that."
He knows where the market boundaries are, especially consumer boundaries, and when to stop pushing innovation. Enduring infrastructure knows its limits.
That's a key lesson for the industry. Now let's pivot to the extreme scale resilience model. The McCarty family, the 2025 Dairy Producer of the Year. This is the vertical integration model.
They milk 18 to 20,000 cows across multiple states. They are one of the largest registered Holstein operations in North America.
But again, the cow count isn't the lesson here. The lesson is control. It's total control. They control processing through their massive long-term partnership with Danone, utilizing ultrafiltration and reverse osmosis to produce high-specification milk solids. They even achieved B Corporation certification, which validates their commitment to social and environmental performance.
They are not commodity milk sellers.
No, they are supply chain managers delivering a specific premium ingredient to a defined customer.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate. That 400-cow operator in Wisconsin listening right now is going to ask, should I vertically integrate, like the McCartys?
And the honest answer is, Probably not in that exact form.
Right.
Vertical integration at that scale requires massive, often proprietary processing infrastructure, a dedicated distribution network, which Danone provides, and access to capital markets that is simply unavailable to a mid-sized operation. They needed that scale to justify the capital expense of the processing plants.
So the lesson isn't go vertical immediately. It's understand your unique advantages. Exactly. The McCartys leveraged their capital access and their specific, long-standing processor relationship. The average farmer needs to identify their specific advantage, whether it's a regional niche or proximity to a smaller, specialized processor.
So we need a model that is replicable for that middle market, and that brings us to the counter model of collaboration, Genesource.
I love the Genesource story. It's 8 Iowa farming families, including the Carrolls, Simons, Rowlands, Demers, who decided to pool their resources back in 2014 to operate one farm with centralized decision-making.
So they didn't sell out to a corporation?
No. They formed a cooperative structure with centralized genetics and management.
And the results are undeniable. They consistently produce elite genetics like Genesource Captain, maintaining top-tier TPI rankings. They're supplying embryos and young sires consistently into major AI platforms.
This proves that collective investment, driven by aligned genetic goals and disciplined management, can achieve results that neither individual farms nor corporate genetics firms can match alone.
This is resilience through collective intelligence. They benefit from shared capital, diversified risk, and talent concentration.
And that shared capital depth paid dividends in 2020. Remember the Dureco? A massive windstorm destroyed half their facilities in August 2020.
I remember seeing the pictures. Devastating.
Most individual farms facing that level of destruction are forced into liquidation because they lack the equity to rebuild quickly. But because 8 families pooled resources, they had the capital depth to rebuild state-of-the-art facilities and continue operations, often emerging stronger.
That's structural resilience in action.
It is. The replicable elements are the key here for our listener. You can't necessarily copy the exact ownership structure, but you can adopt the genomic testing discipline, the component-focused genetics approach, and the cooperative purchasing arrangements for things like fertilizer or feed inputs.
So regional groups can implement those strategies tomorrow.
Absolutely. Now let's hit the last major case study, which is the direct weapon for the middle market, the nimbleness advantage.
Okay. If the 2,500 cow operation is the lowest cost per hundredweight supertanker, it also has the slowest decision speed. It takes miles of ocean to turn that ship.
Right. And the 300 to 700 cow dairy is the nimble specialized response vessel. It maximizes margin per cow, not volume efficiency. And the moment volatility hits or a niche market opens, the supertanker is stuck, but the nimble vessel is already pivoting.
So the vulnerable middle exists only if they try to compete head-to-head on cost.
They have to win by exploiting 3 specific gaps that big dairies lose entirely.
First up.
The genetic agility gap. This is huge. Think about a 400 cow herd. They can implement a 100% switch to A2A2 genetics or focus entirely on a high-component Jersey cross using sex, semen, and genomic testing. They can transition their entire genetic profile within 3 to 5 years.
Whereas a 5,000 cow supertanker, that's a decade-long logistical nightmare. You have so much embedded genetic capital, so much complexity in the breeding programs, and so many animals to test, track, and manage. That nimbleness allows the mid-sized farm to rapidly achieve niche premiums that the big guys simply cannot access in the short term.
They can capture the market before the giants can even react.
Second, the labor intimacy gap. In a mid-sized operation, the owner is often walking the barn, touching the cows, running the machinery. They identify the subtle changes, the cow that's slightly off feed, the slight limp, the broken fess post.
The leading indicators. They see it with their own eyes.
Exactly, the leading indicators. Large-scale management relies on data dashboards, sensors, and labor reporting. The lagging indicators. You see the problem on the dashboard 12 hours after the fresh cow suffered a metabolic event. The small operator sees the problem developing and intervenes immediately, saving that cow and preventing a massive veterinary bill.
Right. This intimacy means smaller operations consistently have lower per-cow health costs and faster recovery times.
And the third gap.
Market pivot capability. If a local artisan cheese processor needs a specific protein-to-fat ratio that commands a $2.50 premium, the mid-sized farmer can adjust their ration and grazing plan within days or weeks to hit that target.
The supertanker is locked into multi-year standardized contracts, for massive quantities. Their supply chain, their feed contracts, their processing relationships are all fixed.
They are structurally price takers, forced to accept whatever the commodity market offers. The nimble dairy can become a true potential price maker in a specific high-value segment. The trap only exists if the mid-sized farm forgets that its size is, in fact, its greatest strategic advantage.
We started the show talking about that debt trap. We really need to tie this back to the human and generational cost of poor strategic planning. Succession failure. This isn't just about balance sheets, it's about legacy.
It is about legacy and the financial stress that transfers across generations. An extension economist tracking farm transitions shared this sobering observation. Successful farm transfers, regardless of farm size, have one thing in common: manageable debt loads at the point of transition. The incoming generation needs breathing room, not maximum leverage.
And that's where the 55-year-old expansion dilemma is so destructive. If you're taking on $3 million in new debt in your mid-50s, hoping to ride out the next 15 years, you are guaranteeing that the highest point of risk in the operation's history coincides with your natural decline in energy and the timing of succession.
And think about the psychological toll. You are 65, the cows need milking, the machinery is breaking down, and you're still managing massive monthly principal and interest payments. The stress alone accelerates burnout.
You are 70 before that debt is manageable.
Right. You've forced your successor, often your child, into a high-stakes, high-stress position where failure means the complete loss of the family farm.
It sets them up to fail. Or it forces them to walk away because the proposition is simply unaffordable and way too risky.
That's why partnership models like Genesource ease this tension. By spreading the risk and the debt load across multiple families, the financial exit of one family's generation doesn't trigger the collapse of the whole business.
The remaining partners can buy out the retiring share, maintaining operational continuity.
Exactly. Succession planning must be factored into the capital investment strategy years in advance, not sprung on the next generation.
And speaking of capital investment strategy, we must talk about the source of the advice that leads to these poor decisions. Let's talk about advisor blind spots. Farmers need to be highly attuned to the incentives driving the counsel they receive.
This is perhaps the most actionable advice we can give today. You have to recognize the two major types of advisors because they have fundamentally different goals.
First, the transaction-based advisors.
These are the commercial lenders who earn origination fees, the equipment dealers who earn commissions on sales, and the consultants paid by the project scope, i.e., the expansion plan.
Their business model is entirely reliant on you saying yes to a new transaction.
Right. They aren't acting maliciously, but their financial incentive is structurally biased toward recommending growth and new debt. They are generally not structured to advise, stay at current size, and optimize your margin.
They want the deal to pencil out. They are looking for the yes because that's their job and that's their paycheck. The farmer needs to understand that they are selling an opportunity, not necessarily guaranteeing structural resilience.
Now, contrast that sharply with the relationship-based advisors.
Your vet, your accountant.
Exactly. The veterinarians on service contracts, the accountants on annual retainer, the extension agents on fixed salaries, their primary incentive is your long-term health and survival. They have nothing to gain if you take on a massive new debt load.
And that is where you get the necessary critical context. That large animal vet in Pennsylvania we spoke to had the perfect advice. He said, if fresh cow health and reproduction rates aren't near perfect, adding 200 cows just multiplies your problems by 200.
You're just accelerating a flawed system toward bankruptcy. That's the voice of long-term sustainability. The solution is never relying on just one advisor. You must assemble multiple perspectives.
So you run the brutally honest financial stress tests, that $16 milk scenario, with your accountant before accepting the rosy expansion recommendation from the transaction-based lender.
Balance is key. Both viewpoints have value. You need the capital access the lender provides, but you need the critical assessment the vet and the accountant provide. Otherwise, you're only hearing the voice that benefits from you taking on more risk. That structural discipline in assembling your advisory board is as important as the discipline in your breeding program.
Okay, let's wrap this up with the takeaway package. A farmer just finished milking, they're driving to the feed store, thinking about all this consolidation pressure. What are the 3 non-negotiable things they need to remember from today, tailored specifically for that mid-size operator, 300 to 500 cows?
The first immediate priority shift must be margin over volume. Stop trying to out-volume the supertanker.
So, immediate action, this week. Pull your last 3 milk checks. Review your component premium breakdown. Is the majority of your revenue volume-based or component-based, butter, fat, and protein? If volume is dominant, you are playing the wrong game.
Medium-term strategy, 3 to 6 months. Implement a disciplined genomic testing program immediately. It costs $35 to $55 per animal, but the data is invaluable. Use that data to identify your highest component yielders and set aggressive genetic targets, like 4.5% plus butter fat and 3.4% plus protein goals, based on your specific processor's premium structure.
Long-term positioning, 1 to 2 years. Initiate a full, systematic genetic transition toward that component-focused herd. You'll see measurable herd-wide improvement in first lactation heifers in 18 to 24 months, but the full structural shift in profitability takes 4 to 6 years. You have to commit now.
The second must-do: strategic stress testing. Embed that disciplined approach we discussed into every single major financial decision.
Immediate action this week. If you are considering any capital investment, a new facility, new TMR mixer, cow additions, pause immediately. Call your accountant or your most trusted extension agent. Explain that you need to run a resilience assessment, not just a profitability forecast.
Medium-term strategy, 3 to 6 months. Run the 5-question framework. Specifically, stress test your proposal at adverse conditions. $16 per hundredweight milk, a sustained 30% feed cost spike, and elevated interest rates, like 8 to 10%. If the proposal doesn't survive that scenario, it is speculation, and you walk away, full stop.
Long-term positioning, 1 to 2 years. Embed this stress testing discipline into your formal annual business planning process. Make sure all your advisors, especially those transaction-based ones, understand that your goal is structural resilience, not short-term growth numbers. Challenge any recommendation that fails the $16 milk test.
And finally, the third takeaway: exploiting nimbleness through niche or diversification. Use your size as a competitive weapon against the giants.
Immediate action for this week. Identify your geographic advantage and your immediate premium capture opportunities. Are you close enough to a major population center to support on-farm retail? Or is there a local processor offering specific uncaptured premiums for things like A2A2 or grass-fed milk? Get the data on those premiums.
Medium-term strategy, 3 to 6 months. Pick one diversification route and execute it with commitment. Don't spread yourself thin. That could be contracting for custom heifer-raising University of Wisconsin surveys. Put this revenue stream at $3 to $5 per day per heifer, or researching the required 3-year transition period for certified organic status. Focus on one niche that reduces your dependence on the commodity market.
That Vermont producer is the perfect example here. By combining a component focus with a small on-farm store and summer tours, she reduced her break-even milk price by almost $4 per hundredweight.
And long-term positioning, 1 to 2 years. Launch that chosen diversification stream to actively reduce your commodity price exposure. For example, if retail is the goal, start setting up the $30,000 to $50,000 infrastructure needed for on-farm processing in retail to achieve those 3 to 4 times commodity margins that extension programs document. This is your best long-term hedge against volatility and consolidation. This has been another Bullvine podcast from the Bullvine Podcast. For more straight-talking industry analysis, head to www.thebullvine.com.
The farms that survive and thrive in 2035 won't be the ones that made the smarter predictions about prices or costs. They'll be the ones who build a structural hull that works whether their predictions about the next decade turn out to be right or dead wrong. Which structure are you building?
Subscribe wherever you get podcasts. We're out with new episodes every day, and upcoming topics will be the escalating costs of environmental compliance in major dairy states and how producers are practically managing the complexities of SGMA groundwater mandates in California.